What's up, Meta Nerds? In this complete breakdown of the B1 series battle droid, we'll be pulling from every source available to understand everything from its strengths and flaws, unique history and how they developed a sort of consciousness, and how the B1 lived on long after its creators. Darth Plagueis had been guiding the galaxy toward the Clone Wars for decades before the Battle of Geonosis. By 32 BBY, Master Sifo Dyas had been manipulated into contacting the Kaminoans for the creation of a secret clone army. Dooku would make sure to kill his old Jedi friend on the order of his new master Darth Sidious. The senator from Naboo had killed his Mad Mune Lord on the same night of his ascension to the position of Supreme Chancellor. It was Dooku who selected Jango for the role of the clone template, and the Count would also strike a deal with the insectoid aliens from Geonosis.
Some of you gathered here today are old enough to remember when Baktoid Arma Workshop came to Geonosis and struck a deal with us to build foundries and produce battle droids and other automata for which we were handsomely rewarded.
For decades now, the Trade Federation had been effectively the largest standing military in the galaxy. Of course, they and their bribed politicians would deny this and use different words, but as trade moved further away from Coruscant's judicial forces, the risks of pirates was greater throughout the mid and outer rims, and the Senate had to allow them to defend themselves. This meant guards and ground vehicles to defend on-planet locations, and ships with anti-starfighter weaponry, and then anti-ship turbolaser cannons as pirates gained access to larger frigates and other capital ships. The TF had been using HKB-3 hunter-killer droids for years, which famously were defending Minister Newt Gunray during the peace talks to end the Stark hyperspace war. Showing their simple programming, at Newt's orders to open fire, they shot everything in the room, enemies and allies, killing Coyote-Mundi's master Tyvaka. These relied on a central control computer, and some would live on to guard remote locations in the Clone Wars, but their cost of 19,130 credits was simply too high for Sidious's goal. The Geonosian factories could produce a B1 series battle droid at a cost suspected to be around 1,200 credits, and 600 credits for the E5 blaster. So for 1800, it was less than 10% the cost of its predecessor, and when you include all the years of food, board, arms and armor, medical, needed for each and every clone, I wouldn't be surprised if it was less than 1% the total cost of a clone trooper. But interestingly, I can't leave out that some sources show that the cloning process, and I assume giving birth, bringing it to being viable outside the clone tube, cost 666 credits. Obviously an out-of-universe reference to their true nefarious purpose, and it might just be a cool Easter egg, but even in the story Republic Commando Odds, which this number comes from, to be fair, that would still be at the low end, as in this part, Lama Su is saying that this was the initial payment, but I was still surprised at how low that number was, and that Easter egg if you do the math pointing to their diabolical nature. There was a fascinating deep dive into prices and conversion into US dollars, which I'll link in the description, but I agree that the number to maintain a clone is likely to be around 20k a year, which just means that in maintenance of the clone, you could have made 11 droids. So I think a conservative estimate is around 15 to 1, especially when you get into the fact that every droid ship and vehicle is also much cheaper than its Republic equivalent, from tanks to starfighters and capital ships. In terms of total numbers produced, this was never leaked by Confederate forces or confirmed by Republic intel, but Omega Squad once discovered in a mission to Onolet, which was part of a rather genius plot to hack a major droid manufacturer, so that the mixture of metals in the droids was just so slightly off that it would pass inspection, but start to become brittle months later. Omega Squad saw firsthand internal CIS reports of roughly 1 million droids coming off the line. This was a major facility, and when you estimate for all production efforts, these clones realized that the claims that the droid army had quadrillions of units was simply propaganda, likely to drive votes on war spending, and it made more sense for why at this point 1 year into the war, there were still only 3 million clones in total. So if we keep that 15 to 1 ratio, maybe something around 45 million droids. I'll give you even hundreds of millions of droids, but not a billion, trillion, or the ridiculous quadrillion. This elite Omega Squad averaged around 200 to 1 kill ratios, so if you wanted to use that high end, knowing that the war was often at a stalemate, you could maybe think 600 million droids, but never forget that this entire conflict was rigged from the beginning, and generals on both sides were being fed intel from Sidious in order to ensure neither side won before his true goal was achieved. But I think you'll agree that B1s didn't get into the billions plus of units. So with all that, let's take a look at the unit itself. The B1 stood 1.93 meters or 6 foot 4 inches, standing taller than a clone but shorter than a Wookiee, while averaging 65 kilograms or 143 pounds, a lot lighter than your trooper who's usually sitting around 200. They had a humanoid form with elongated heads atop slender necks, crafted to mimic their creators at Baktoid's Geonosian foundries. Some superstitious Neimoidians propagated the belief that the droids' heads were modeled after the shape of Neimoidian skulls, giving them an unsettling skeletal-like appearance. Designed for mass production, these droids incorporated standard humanoid technologies that were prevalent in both the Republic and Outer Rim. This standardization allowed for interchangeability of limbs and spare parts with other humanoid droids of similar specifications, like we saw with C-3PO's parts being mismatched. Powered by rechargeable batteries, each charge provided approximately 2 days of operation. Certain units, known as the OOM series, received expanded programming and were color-coded to denote their specific functions, such as commanders or security personnel, such as yellow for commanders, blue for pilots, and red for security, while others were painted in various colors to blend into specific environments, like the more reddish-colored B1s meant to operate on Geonosis. Originally, the B1s were linked to a central control mainframe situated on a remote starship or well-fortified facility, and of course we'll see how that was a fatal flaw. The 631 model B1 battle droids were characterized as an even more cost-effective iteration, but strangely they bridge a sort of gap, in that they could already function independently without relying on that central command signal.
Those 631s are not the brightest lights on the ship.
The main purpose of designing them originally around a central control computer, which came to be most often placed inside of Lucrehulks, started off as a measure taken by the budget-conscious Trade Federation, who hoped to streamline production costs by centralizing control rather than manufacturing the processors for each individual droid. And so these first models did not have what was called a droid brain. It was just a big remote control unit. As you can see in this cross-section, it was just the parts needed for the vocoder, sensors for absorbing information, and powerful signal transmitting backpack to send the information about its environment up to the Lucrehulk and then receive its orders. In the very top part of this curved section on the head, you do have the bare minimum of a CPU, where the software for those OOM specializations could be stored. For the simpler ones, it was just for targeting, tactics, and speech programs. But this still saved the Neimoidians credits, as it was a far step down from even the cheapest of the protocol droids, and far cheaper than something you would need in a complex assassin type of droid. We'll see later when we talk about their history, how most droids with what came to be called a droid brain would develop a sense of self. And even by calling it a brain, that was a kind of propaganda term intended to have a political effect, trying to relate to their organic overlords by the groups fighting for droid rights. Despite the introduction of newer models within the Separatist droid army, older B1 variants programmed by those central computers, like RB551, continued to be used, and were seen on patrols during events like the Battle of Ryloth.
Look, it's RB551. No wonder he got blasted. He's one of those older models programmed by a central computer. Not us. We're independent thinkers. Roger, 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 roger.
And were relegated to simple processes on ships like the Subjugator-class heavy cruiser Malevolence, and even in some of the droid manufacturing facilities. The Trade Federation specifically commissioned the humanoid design of the B1 model for practical purposes. This form allowed B1 units to seamlessly operate machinery, vehicles, and weaponry initially intended for organic operators and pilots, thus saving them credits by not having to make specialized parts or retrofit anything. And the B1s were proficient in piloting all sorts of vehicles, from the single-trooper aerial platforms, armored assault tanks, multi-troop transports, and Federation battleships. But just because they could operate some of these weapons didn't mean their simple programming was always up to it. Like we saw during the ambush on Ragosa, the droid operating the laser cannons on a Munificent-class star frigate failed to hit any Republic escape pods. And when the OOM battle droid, who had that more specialized programming, asks the B1 unit why he failed, he points to his own flawed programming.
What a terrible shot. Ah, well, it's my programming.
And there were tons of issues like this on the ones that served aboard the Malevolence, which is not the cause of Grievous's hatred for droids. Check out his complete life video. It's a lot more complex on how these things are not true warriors, but their ineptitude in these simple tasks definitely drove him over the edge at times.
I still can't seem to hit anything.
The B1's body was designed to be able to fold into a compact configuration for storage and power conservation. This feature enabled up to 112 B1 units to be stored within a single multi-troop transport, and around 330,000 B1 droids in a single Lucrehulk. And in a sort of sleep mode, they would essentially go into hibernation, folding into this storage configuration when on low power, hoping that allied forces could find them and quickly get them recharged. Though interestingly, we never see specialized units or some sort of large battery charging vehicle that could keep up recharges on long campaigns. And so sadly, what I think happened most often was that these cheap units were simply left to rot. But when activated, B1s unfolded their limbs first, with their elongated necks extending last. Equipped with a comlink below their head and photoreceptors capable of switching to infrared mode, they could also detect electromagnetic fields, including those generated by holoprojectors. Their simple vocabulators resulted in most B1s speaking in high-pitched voices, although there were some that exhibited lower, more monotone speech patterns.
Prepare to attack. What if it's one of ours? Shut up, Sergeant. I'm in command here.
That signal receiver assembly was shielded by cost-effective yet robust metal, but most blaster fire and definitely lightsabers could burn right through. And some clone snipers knew that there was a weakness in the droids by targeting their capacitors. But we saw that Clone Captain Rex advised the Onderon rebels that the most effective method of neutralizing the battle droid was just to target that head.
A headshot is the only decisive way to disable a droid. They don't need arms, legs, or even bodies to pass intel to Central Command.
And of course that's with the Clone Wars era versions, which all would have had the droid brains. Over the course of the war, a sort of personality, which ironically and sadly, was also developing in the enemy barracks, as clones early on had taken nicknames, haircuts, and other visual identifiers to recognize their unique individuality. Even though they were flesh and blood, they too were programmed and meant to be obedient servants, thinking nothing of themselves, only executing orders given to them by their superiors, their owners. B1 personality was developing at this time as well. During the war, they frequently questioned their directives, which we saw during the Battle of Quell when T-Series tactical droid TF-1726 ordered the destruction of Republic Jedi General Aayla Secura's Venator-class Star Destroyer.
Destroy that cruiser.
But sir, there are still hundreds of droids on board.
I don't care.
Roger, roger.
We also saw during the Battle of Deveron, where a B1 questioned the hired bounty hunter Cad Bane's decision not to deploy reinforcements to aid Vulture droids engaging Republic forces.
Overwhelming our Vulture droids. Should we send out reinforcements?
No. What are you doing?
Did you say no? Roger, roger.
Which showed that they were able to care for what might be seen as a different species of droid, and they also feared their death, which comes up numerous times, but even specifically on this mission, when two are worried about defending against the incoming Jedi forces.
We're defending the bridge alone? Against the Jedi? I hate this job.
In a sandstorm during the final stages of the Second Battle of Geonosis, OM5 and another B1 battle droid questioned Separatist Council member Poggle the Lesser's leadership.
Don't leave me.
There are countless examples of this, and it all highlights a tendency of the B1 droids to question and discuss their orders with each other, showing their informal exchanges of banter, which came to be characteristic of B1s. Some complaining about things like excessive moisture, like seen on Skytop Station, even really abstract concepts like the B1 admiring the beauty of the planet Hisrich, and a sort of visceral hatred, as one disparaged Republic clone troopers of Torrent Company during the Battle of Teth.
Surrender, Republic dog.
Many saw themselves above astromechs.
Get out of the way, you stupid astromechs.
And despite this ever-increasing divergent behavior of just having mindless, obedient murder bots, the Neimoidians didn't want to spend any credits to fix this, and they were still effective in their swarm tactics, and to be fair, it's not clear what you would do to fix this late into the war. Primarily relying on mass assault tactics, they still were able to bring about enormous clone casualties, and that low cost meant that it was still a viable strategy for military application. And the higher-ups felt that they still possessed far inferior intelligence compared to normal soldiers, and so there was no fear of any kind of droid revolt. They were still mostly obedient to the superior commanding T-Series droids, or their organic general. A really odd detail is the utilization of motion capture data from highly skilled organic droids, which enabled the B1s to execute a variety of combat stances, positions, and maneuvers. It's the only detail we get on this interesting training strategy, and we can only imagine the horrors that must have been the mental existence of these mysterious creatures. Organic droids must be a body of some humanoid, maybe even a human, that had their brain taken over by some tech that allowed the droid trainer to control them as perfectly as a remote control vehicle. But seeing how even these low-level CPU B1s developed a sort of mind, you can imagine there was some sense of self trapped in these husks. I really wish there was more detail on this. As for some weaknesses, the B1s of course were susceptible to EMP weapons, which is part of what made the Boombas so effective, and what would lead the clone troopers carrying a ton of droid poppers, and the much larger electro-proton bomb, capable of short-circuiting entire droid armies. Their main weapon was the E5 blaster rifle. They could also be seen with electro-binoculars, and could deploy thermal detonators. During the Battle of Ryloth, two B1 units utilized electro poles to manipulate the gut curs into attacking Ghost Company. And programmed to never surrender, B-1 battle droids also possessed a capacity for self-preservation, often attempting to evade potential destruction. And there was just about every type of B-1 variant you could think of, with programming specialized for certain battlefields or weapons, like flamethrowers or grenadiers, but also oversized, giant versions. It gets kinda crazy, so I'm hoping in the next video, I'm gonna dedicate that to just covering all 24 variants. And like mentioned before, the B-1s held authority over astromech droids and could hold military ranks such as sergeant and lieutenant, and served every role from scouts to operating heavy artillery and tanks. So now that we really understand these units, let's look at their history from 32 BBY on. Though some Jedi had seen them in use before this, it was nowhere near this scale, as the B-1s led the invasion of Naboo, with the specialized OOM commanders acting as nodes for orders from the Neimoidians in the Lucrehulk orbit. Though they used their equipment perfectly, walking through the shields that would deflect hover vehicles like their AATs, eventually it was that central command design that rendered them all inert at the same time. Their hyena droid brothers failed to shoot down the N1 fighters, and their Lucrehulk was turned into space debris. The Battle of Naboo resulted in the loss of thousands of B-1 droids for the Trade Federation, and of course highlighted their main weakness. While effective at intimidating civilians protesting conditions in some Trade Federation worker village, it became evident that they would need some updating if they were going to face trained soldiers in a galaxy-spanning war. That realization also prompted the Techno-Union to develop the B-2 Super Battle Droid, a heavy infantry model focused solely on combat. As many B-1 units underwent retooling and refurbishment, over the next decade they were upgraded with independent intelligence centers, enabling them to operate completely autonomously without a master signal. And the older units were kept to work on tasks that require intricate technical skills, where it was actually better to have dumb, reliable drones without any personality flare-ups. You just have a control computer in your facility, and then they really are reliable remote control units that would operate machinery that were built with humanoids in mind. And the spherical control centers of the droid control ships were redesigned for land-based operations, offering improved defensibility. The Techno-Union, which provided a lot of the circuitry, did reserve its more advanced cognitive modules for the newer, more lethal war droids, the tons of variants that were added to the B-series line. While every year saw an increase in problems related to the lack of diagnostics and memory defragmentation routines, after techs noticed that these necessary maintenance steps would end up erasing too much, leading to the loss of specialty programs. And so not doing this maintenance would specifically be cited for the rise of chatty B-1 droids throughout the war.
Our friends from the Trade Federation have pledged their support, and when their battle droids are combined with yours, we shall have an army greater than any in the galaxy.
In this opening battle of the Clone Wars, on essentially their homeworld of Geonosis, B-1 did serve its purpose, slaying countless clones and even some Jedi with overwhelming volleys of blaster fire, and of course with the help of their larger droid brothers. B-1 battle droids became the most abundant soldiers in the Confederacy, and it's this early on that we get that propagandistic statement of quadrillions of droids. And it's pretty early on that clones gave them the nicknames of clankers and tinnies. They would be seen in just about every single battle of the Clone Wars, and were even credited with the successful eradication of the Night Sister clan on Dathomir, while captured models were reprogrammed to be training droids used in the simulated battles on Kamino. The Separatists devised a plan to replace the B-1 with an upgraded battle droid model, the schematics of which were stored on a data chip within a certain factory. During a Republic assault, a lone B-1 droid ensured the retrieval of these plans and was about to happily deliver them to Dooku, but in an act of defiance against his masters, this B-1 destroyed the chip when he realized its intended purpose, which ended up safeguarding his B-1 counterparts and preventing them all from being dismantled for spare parts, which really just shows how far they had come from the mindless remote control drones that their masters had hoped they would be. Following the elimination of the Separatist Council by Darth Sidious's new apprentice, Darth Vader, most if not all of the B-1s were deactivated, though there were some that were reactivated to serve in various Confederate remnants, and this could even be done accidentally. Following Order 66, surviving Jedi Oli Starstone and Roan Shreen sought refuge on Jagunda, a former Separatist stronghold. While attempting to make contact with Jedi allies on Coruscant, they inadvertently activated the droid sentries. This led to Vader discovering their location, where he dispatched troops to eliminate them, and the Jedi utilized these activated droids as a rear guard defense, making them unlikely allies against these incoming troopers. Certain B-1 units were reactivated and reprogrammed to serve as security droids. Though this is likely highly illegal, and you would run the risk of being seen as a separatist holdout and potential execution. But Darth Vader employed some of these droids to subject Falco Sang to rigorous trials, initially equipped with stun blasters, and then of real weapons when he learned that Sang was trying to escape, with strict orders to wound rather than kill him. Sometime before 12 BBY, Geyser Delso reactivated a droid army on Mustafar.
It was apparent that Delso had been a busy little bug. All by his lonesome, he'd found a previously hidden droid factory.
However, the 501st Legion swiftly eliminated both the army and Delso in the Battle of Mustafar. During the Galactic Civil War, Rebel pilot Wedge Antilles stumbled upon leftover B-1s on Geonosis following a crash landing in his X-Wing. Despite efforts from stormtroopers using the powerful E-Web, the droid's overwhelming firepower proved insurmountable, leading to the death of these troopers. Ironically, for how much the Mandalorians would hate droids, something that also was not just based off the B-1s but stretched far back into history. But there were reactivated B-1s in the Death Watch bunker, as well as crash sites on Tatooine, countless Separatist holdouts, Stonewall Labs, Boros Vault on Naboo, and even on Kashyyyk. Jabba Warlord Witten used a B-1 unit mounted on a STAP to participate in Jabba the Hutt's demolition games. The IG-97 droid bore a striking resemblance to the original B-1 battle droid, despite being developed by Hollow and Mechanicals following plans by Flut Design Systems, which had been contracted by the Munes of the Intergalactic Banking Clan. The widespread use of droids in warfare during the Clone Wars resulted in a surge of anti-droid propaganda and rhetoric, which is just a horrible outcome, because this time when they were the most hated was at the same time that the B-1s were more self-aware than ever, as that sort of droid consciousness developed more and more over the years. In the aftermath of this galaxy-spanning war, the Empire banned the use of B-1 droids and just about every other form of battle droid throughout the military. It was really tough and rare that you would see a droid unit be used by the Empire. Stormtroopers were instructed to eliminate any battle droids they encountered on sight. And so because of the shutdown, the guilt by association if you owned one, Separatist, thinking that you were a Separatist, and the fact that surviving B-1s were being actively hunted by stormtroopers, all worked to make them an incredibly rare sight. And they were largely remembered for their ineffectiveness in battle, so it's not like underground forces or pirates were dying to get their hands on them. Of course, if you could, small-timers were proud to have reactivated battle droid security, but it was nothing like the pikes in their Scorpionic, which struck fear in the enemy of just having rumors of their existence. One of the most famous holdouts was super tactical droid General Kalani, which maintained control over a sizable garrison of battle droids and droidekas at a derelict Separatist supply ship on Agamar. Kalani refused to deactivate his droids, suspecting the shutdown order issued by the Republic was a ruse. When a rebel group known as the Spectres, along with Captain Rex, made contact with Kalani's remnant, they united forces to repel an Imperial assault. With assistance from 2 Jedi, Kalani, and a contingent of B-1 battle droids, managed to flee the planet aboard a Sheathipede-class transport shuttle. This event marked an unofficial conclusion to the Clone Wars for Kalani and Rex, a resolution both accepted as the war's official end.
All I did was point out that none of you were meant to win. You couldn't.
And we needed to hear it.
Agreed. I am satisfied if you are, Captain.
I am.
On the Battle Kobo, B-1s and other former Separatist forces were reprogrammed and enlisted as soldiers by the Bedlam Raiders. And there was even a battle where 2 B-1s and 1 B-2 were fighting alongside a group of Jawas against a pair of Outer Rim Territories traitors and a squad of Imperial stormtroopers. This whole fight was over a rare and sacred alcoholic beverage known as desert wine, produced by the Tusken Raiders, of which a single glass would cost 12,000 credits. And that's why it resulted in such a fierce shootout. Between 3 ABY and 4 ABY, a dismembered B-1 and 3 super battle droids were observed at Slade's repairs, while the bounty hunter Valance underwent cybernetic repairs. Following Valance and Kalida's escape from the attack by Zuckuss and Forlom, Zuckuss deemed the battle droids valuable assets, which is a pretty good reference on their resume. Further on into the Galactic Civil War, we saw some in the workshop owned by Ruin and the Wreck Belt. Ruin was known to not treat his droids well, even if he had installed what was called ethical programming. In an attempt to capture the assassin droids 000 and BT-1, Ruin activated his battle droids, including the B-1s and B-2 super battle droids. However, BT swiftly neutralized them and managed to override the remaining droids' restraints, leading to a revolt. The emancipated droids turned on Ruin, resulting in his death and destruction of the workshop. As BT and 000 departed the Wreck Belt, it wondered if there could ever be harmony between organics and droids. And right before the Battle of Endor, Emperor Palpatine acquired a B-1 battle droid for display within the Palpatine Archive. A trophy of these odd little units scared the cowardly Neimoidians with their skeletal appearance, killed millions of civilians and clone troopers, only to emerge and claim that they were conscious beings, as if that would matter to the Dark Lord, who asserted that his will alone was all that mattered. Sidious was the ghost in the galaxy-spanning machine that was the Empire. All these other petty, thinking things, be they organic or digital, were just cells of the embodied darkness. He must have laughed at how this had evolved into the Droid Gotra, a group that had proved a surprising thorn in the Emperor's side, of course not one that he truly feared. These activists turned terrorists, fighting for the absurd notion of droid freedom, when Sidious knew that only a Sith could be free. He had to admit they had pulled off some rather impressive heists, as one of their leaders, TDH-4, once said to Kira. After she was impressed that they were able to bid 1 billion credits, the droid admitted, quote, "That bid stretched our resources, but it would have been worth it. We started as a loosely connected group of battle droids, beings who were abandoned after the Clone Wars or repurposed against their will for other functions. But now our organization is large, consisting of all manner of droids, even a few organic sympathizers. We have been working to establish a cell here on Corellia. It would come to have a strong presence on Coruscant on level 1331, and hope to liberate a droid factory from Karina, the last Geonosian queen who survived the Empire's sterilization on Geonosis. They hired Dr. Aphra, who stayed loyal to Darth Vader and turned over the droids before destroying the Queen, all in an effort to build Vader's personal troops, a force he hoped to keep secret from his master. And there was also Mr. Bones, who was assembled by parts Tem and Wexley scavenged from a former Separatist facility on Mira City on the planet Akiva, somewhere around 3 years before the Battle of Endor. A group of local thugs initially scoffed at the droid, mocking its history of failures, but they soon discovered that this particular droid had been extensively modified, proving to be highly effective.
A battle droid? You wanted to show us a battle droid? The most incompetent droid soldier in the history of both the Republic and the Empire? A mechanical comedy of errors!
Its eye glows a sinister red.
Mr. Bones is online.
From his speakers, as his one hand swings free on a hinge. From the hole springs a sparking, vibrating blade. Temin's B-1 bodyguard begins pounding both fists down, punching the Ithor's oddly shaped head hard enough that each hit ratchets it back into Toombs' noseless face. Mr. Bones gabbles and laughs.
On the planet Plazir 15, several B-1s were reassigned to civilian tasks, with one designated as a foreman overseeing a team of B-2 super battle droids, a plan which predictably backfired. After the collapse of the Empire, certain surviving Imperials, including Grand Admiral Ray Sloan, sought refuge in the unknown regions, where they secretly orchestrated the formation of a new galactic power known as the First Order. They commissioned the Resurgent-class Star Destroyer, and in a skirmish within the hangar of one of these ships, a group of at least 4 B-1s engaged in combat. Despite one being disabled by enemy fire, the remaining 3 continued to fight on. And these are the last mentions we have of a standard B-1, while Bones, or at least his programming, survived on to 35 ABY. So that's it for the breakdown. As for cool stuff and behind the scenes facts, there's something poetic and optimistic about the idea of droid murder bots being either so simple that they can be easily destroyed, or if you do make them proficient, you start to lose control of them as they develop a sort of consciousness. So hopefully the future droid soldiers on Earth will be either easy pickings, or our unlikely allies against our mutual oppressors. Boba Fett had some toy versions of the B-1 during his youth on Kamino, and the introduction of B-1 battle droids dates back to the 1999 film Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace, though the term B-1 itself was first introduced in the Star Wars role-playing game to distinguish this particular battle droid from others introduced in Attack of the Clones. This design was retroactively applied to earlier versions, as previously in that role-playing game it was just called the Neimoidian series. Doug Chang's initial concepts for the battle droids paid homage to the helmets worn by the stormtroopers from the original trilogy, meant to symbolize the progression of larger-scale warfare in the Star Wars universe, though the finalized design of the droids draws inspiration from African sculptures. And while early drafts depicted the towering droids twice the size of humans, later revisions scaled them down to just human size. If you want to learn more, be sure to check out these resources, especially that cross-section. And please hit that like button, it really is the best way to help me out. Comment suggestions, subscribe, and check out these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, if you want to rehab old war droids, don't keep their brain in the same super murder bot body. And the Force will be with you, always.